Hello, today we're looking at lesson 3.9, rounding to estimate with fractions. Today we'll learn how to round fractions, and we'll also learn how to estimate the answer when we're doing operations with fractions. We won't be solving any actuals today, only estimates. The rules for rounding for fractions are, if the fraction is half or more, we increase the whole number by 1. If the fraction is less than half, we leave the whole number as it is. And this is consistent with the rules of rounding we learned with whole numbers. If you remember from whole numbers, if we had a 5 or greater, so 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, we rounded up. Whereas if we had a 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, we kept the number the same. And it's very similar in terms of fractions. A 5 out of 10 is 50% or halfway, and so is 6, 7, 8, 9. And then 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 means we keep the number as it is. So we'll see this come into play with our fractions. When we look at rounding a number like 1 1/3, we're going to have to make the decision to either round it to 2 or round it down to 1. There's a couple methods. One of them the book doesn't show, but it's actually the method I prefer. And it's to think about the fraction in terms of a test score. So if you got 1 out of 3 on a test, so let's say that this was a quiz, your quiz mark would be quite low because you only got 1 question right, but you got 2 questions wrong. So that means that you didn't score halfway. You didn't get 50%. You didn't pass that quiz. So if you look at the fraction in those terms, and you ask yourself, is that enough to pass? If the answer is no, then you're going to round what we call rounding down. You're going to leave the number as it is. So 1 1/3 is closer to 1 than it is to 2 because the fraction is not strong enough. Method 2 is how the book shows, and I like the method. It just takes a little bit more time, I think, and sometimes we don't need to spend the time. But it's a great method if you're not sure. With method 2, what you can do is you can multiply the numerator by 2. And if the answer you get is still smaller than the denominator, so the 2 is smaller, then this means that we round down. So after multiplying the numerator by 2, if the numerator is still smaller than the denominator, then we know for sure that we round down, which means we keep the whole number as it is, and we drop the fraction off. So 1 1/3 rounds to 1. Visually, we can see this on the number line. We don't have to create number lines, but it's just showing you the position that 1 1/3 is between 1 and 2. The divisions between 1 and 2 are 3 equal segments, and that the 1 1/3 would be much closer to 1 than it is to 2. Therefore, 1 1/3 is rounding to 1. For example, number 2, we're rounding 2 3/4 to the nearest whole number. So we're going to take a look at the fraction. First method is think of it like a quiz. So how did you do? You got 3 out of 4. That's a good score. You got 3 right and only 1 wrong. So that means you already met that halfway mark. So 2 3/4, because the 3/4 is strong, is going to round up to 3. Second method that the book shows is the multiplication method. If you're not sure, what you can do is multiply the numerator by 2. In this case, you get an answer of 6 over 4. The numerator is now bigger, so if the numerator is bigger than the denominator when you multiply by 2, you are going to round up. So 2 3/4 rounds up to 3. Either one of these methods works very well. And visually on the number line, we can see that between 2 and 3, we divided into 4 equal segments because the denominator is out of 4, and that 2 3/4 is the third segment down the line. So that is much closer to 3 than it is to 2, and that's why it rounds up to 3. The reason why we change fractions to whole numbers is so that we can quickly know approximately what the answer is going to be. So we're going to be estimating two mixed numbers, changing them to whole numbers, and then quickly adding them to get an estimate. So the first one is 8 1/5. If you look at it like a quiz, 1 out of 5, that's not at the halfway mark. That's not a good score. So that 8 1/5 is going to round down to 8. For the 3 4/7, on a quiz, if you were to get 4 out of 7, that means you got 4 right and 3 wrong. So you got more right than wrong. So that means that you've met the halfway mark. So 4/7 is also strong enough to round the 3 4/7 up to 4. Then we add our numbers, getting an estimate of 12. Now let's say with that 3 4/7 you weren't quite sure if that's going to be a fraction that meets the halfway mark. You could multiply the numerator, which would give you 8 over 7. And remember, if the 8 is bigger than the denominator, which it is, then that means we round up. So we can see both methods work for us to get 8 plus 4 is 12. For the do together, I'm going to talk through the fractions using the first method, which is the method that I prefer because it goes a bit quicker. So we're going to round 3 5/8 to the nearest whole number. I look at the fraction and I ask myself, is this fraction half or more? If I got 5 out of 8 on a test, that would be a pass because I got 5 right and only 3 wrong. So that meets the halfway criteria. 3 5/8 is going to round up to 4. For number 2, I'm going to estimate the sum, so I won't solve the actual. I'm going to look to round. 3 out of 4 on a quiz is a good mark, so 4 3/4 will round to 5. And 7 1/2, we're at the halfway mark. Remember, half or greater rounds up, so half is going to push that 7 to 8. And 5 plus 8 is 13. For number 3, we're going to round 4 1/4. If I got 1 out of 4 on a quiz, that wouldn't be a pass, so 4 1/4 rounds down to 4. And for 3 5/6, 5 out of 6 on a quiz is a pass. That's a good mark. So that's going to push the 3 up to a 4. So we'll have 4 times 4 is 16. I'm just going to do a few more questions from the exercise. You can either stop the video or you can follow along with me. So we're going to round these mixed numbers to the nearest whole number. So for number 1, we have 2 3/8. 3 out of 8 is not a pass. That's not halfway. So this will round down to 2. For number 2, 3 2/3. On a test, if you got 2 out of 3, that means you got 2 right and only 1 wrong. So that would be a pass. So this rounds up to 4. For number 3, we have 4 1/4. 1 out of 4 is not halfway, so that fraction is not strong enough to push the 4 to a 5. So 4 1/4 is closer to 4 than it is to 5. And for number 4, we have 5 4/5. 4 out of 5 on a quiz is good. That's at halfway, and greater than halfway, of course. So we're going to push that 5, that fraction strong enough to push the 5 up to a 6. Remember, when you're asked to round the fractions and then do the operations, you don't have to solve the actual. We haven't learned how to add and subtract fractions yet, so we're just going to get the estimates here. So we're going to look at 5/8. This is greater than half. 5 out of 8 means 5 right, 3 wrong. So that's going to push up to 4. And 11 out of 16, that's also greater than half. 11 right, 5 wrong. Right? So that's big fraction. So that's going to push the 2 to become a 3. So 4 plus 3 is 7 for our estimate. And number 13, we have subtraction. We're going to look at this half fraction. That's going to push the 42 to a 43. And then for the next one, we're going to look at this 5/8, and we've seen this one before. That's greater than half, so it's going to be 43 minus 29. So we'll just do that over here. 43 minus 29, we'll have to borrow. 13 minus 9 is 4, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So we are getting an answer for an estimate of 14.